black people knew their glorious past, then they would be more inclined to respect themselves.
We can do it. We shall do it. We have prayed to God for vision and for leadership. And He has given us a universal vision. A vision that will not limit our possibilities to America. A vision that will not limit our possibilities to the West Indies, but a vision that said it must be a free and redeemed Africa.
What if Africa had united under a bold vision, a self-sufficient, prosperous, and technologically advanced Black utopia? From the shores of Liberia to the hopeful streets of Accra, from the historic landing grounds of Freetown to the global dreams of Marcus Garvey, and even in the fictional heights of Wakanda, the dream of a truly united Africa has been imagined, attempted, and fought for across generations. In the early 19th century, long before the modern calls for Pan-African unity, two cities, Liberia's Monrovia and Sierra Leone's Freetown, stood as living experiments in Black self-governance and the reconnection between Africa and its diaspora. These settlements weren't just new homes. They were bold attempts to forge a future where freed Africans, returning from the Americas and Europe, could reclaim their heritage and shape their own destinies, free from the grip of colonial rule. Liberia, founded in 1822, was envisioned as a beacon, a self-governing Black republic where freed African Americans could build a society rooted in democracy, commerce, and African unity. The very name Liberia, meaning land of freedom, carried the weight of hope for an entire race. But that vision was complicated from the start. Tensions brewed between the settlers, who saw themselves as pioneers bringing civilization, and the indigenous African communities, who had their own complex cultures and histories long before the ships arrived. What was meant to be a harmonious model of unity too often fractured into mistrust and division. Still, Liberia's founding planted the seed of a greater idea that the African continent could become a home and sanctuary for all its scattered children. Freetown, established 3 decades earlier in 1792, carried similar hopes, though born from a different history. It began as a refuge for freed Black loyalists, formerly enslaved Africans who fought for the British during the American Revolution, promised freedom, then left stranded in Nova Scotia. With support from abolitionists like John Clarkson and the Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor, they set sail for West Africa, seeking a permanent home where they could live free from oppression. Freetown's population grew to include Black soldiers who had fought in the Napoleonic Wars, Caribbean Maroons, and other returning Africans, all bringing with them a kaleidoscope of cultures, languages, and identities. But here, too, colonial entanglements threatened the dream. British oversight, economic exploitation, and local resistance created a complicated legacy, part refuge, part colonial outpost. Despite their struggles, Liberia and Freetown represent something larger, the first real-world efforts to reconnect Africa with its diaspora, bridging oceans and centuries of displacement. They stand as both cautionary tales and early blueprints for what could have been, independent Black states where African unity wasn't just an idea, but a living, breathing reality. These experiments, though imperfect, set the stage for the bold Pan-African visions that would emerge in the 20th century, and they still hold lessons for the future we could build today. In 1957, Ghana made history, becoming the first sub-Saharan African nation to break free from colonial rule. But for Kwame Nkrumah, independence wasn't just the end of the struggle, it was the beginning of a much larger dream. For Nkrumah, Ghana's freedom would only have meaning if it led to the liberation and unification of the entire African continent. Nkrumah envisioned a politically united Africa, a continent where the artificial borders left behind by colonialism would dissolve, replaced by a single Pan-African government capable of defending Africa's resources, fostering economic independence, and uplifting its people. To him, unity was survival. A fragmented Africa would remain vulnerable to external control, while a united Africa could stand tall on the global stage. From the very start, Ghana became a beacon, not just for Africa, but for the African diaspora as well. Nkrumah invited freedom fighters, intellectuals, and leaders from across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas to Accra. Ghana hosted Pan-African congresses, where newly independent nations gathered to strategize, share ideas, and build the foundations for African cooperation. Nkrumah's Ghana wasn't just a nation. It was a symbol, a call to action, proof that Black people could govern themselves and shape their own destinies. Black Star Square became a powerful emblem of this vision, its very name a tribute to the Black Star Line, a nod to the movement that first planted the seeds of Pan-African unity in Nkrumah's mind.
The Negro is a man. We represent a new Negro. His back is not yet against the wall. We do not want his back against the wall because that would be a peculiar and desperate position. We do not want him there. It is because of this that we are asking for fair compromise. Where the Belgians have control of the Belgian Congo, which they cannot.
Long before Ghana's independence, a young Nkrumah had been profoundly influenced by Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican-born leader whose call for global Black pride, self-reliance, and African repatriation inspired millions. Garvey's dream of a strong, united Africa as the heart of global Black empowerment would become the foundation for Nkrumah's own Pan-African politics. As we'll see next, Garvey's vision didn't just influence Nkrumah. It set the stage for an entire global movement, connecting Africa's future to the destiny of Black people worldwide. His family's social standing gave young Garvey access to education, books, and ideas, a foundation that would shape his lifelong passion for Black advancement. As a young man, Garvey worked as a printer and trade unionist, where he witnessed firsthand the struggles of working-class Jamaicans under British colonial rule. His early experiences forged his belief that the oppression of Black people wasn't isolated to one island or one country, it was global, and so the fight for liberation had to be global too. During his formative years, Garvey was deeply influenced by the legacy of George William Gordon, a prominent Jamaican politician and businessman of mixed race who championed the rights of the Black poor. Gordon's execution after the Morant Bay Rebellion of 1865, an uprising sparked by land disputes, hunger, and British neglect, stood as a stark warning of the brutal consequences faced by those who dared to demand justice. Garvey understood from Gordon's fate, and from colonial complaints filed against figures like Governor Charles Henry Darling, that the colonial system wasn't just exploitative, it was designed to keep Black people powerless in their own lands. Determined to break that cycle, Garvey would go on to found one of the largest mass movements in Black history, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA. Established in 1914, the UNIA wasn't just a political organization, it was a cultural, economic, and spiritual call to action. Garvey preached the necessity of a united, independent Africa, a homeland where all descendants of Africa could return, rebuild, and reclaim their dignity after centuries of displacement and exploitation. In his vision, Africa would rise as the economic, cultural, and political center of the Black world, a symbol of strength for African people everywhere. At the heart of Garvey's vision was the Black Star Line, a fleet of ships meant to connect Africa with its global diaspora through trade, migration, and cultural exchange. It was a direct response to the exclusion of Black people from global commerce and a bold attempt to create a Pan-African economic infrastructure run by and for Black people. Though the Black Star Line ultimately failed, the symbolism of the Black Star, a beacon of Pan-African unity, would endure, even becoming the centerpiece of Ghana's national flag decades later. But Garvey's radical vision, coupled with his fiery rhetoric, made him enemies, not just from white colonial powers, but from within the Black intellectual elite. W.E.B. Du Bois and others in the NAACP saw Garvey's Back-to-Africa movement as unrealistic, even dangerous. While Du Bois advocated for civil rights and integration within existing American society, Garvey argued that true Black freedom required self-sufficiency, separation, and an African homeland. Their rivalry would become one of the most famous ideological battles in Black history. Ultimately, Garvey's ambitions collided with political persecution. Edgar Hoover's Bureau of Investigation sought to discredit Garvey and dismantle his movement. Convicted of mail fraud in connection with the Black Star Line, Garvey was imprisoned, then deported, never allowed to set foot on African soil, the very land at the heart of his life's work. Though Garvey's movement was fractured, his ideas endured, inspiring future generations of Pan-Africanists, from Kwame Nkrumah to Malcolm X. His belief in a unified, self-sufficient, and proud Africa, standing at the center of global Black progress, remains a guiding star for those still working to fulfill his dream. In the 21st century, the global imagination was reignited by a single word: Wakanda. Introduced to mainstream audiences through Marvel's Black Panther, Wakanda is more than a fictional kingdom. It's a vision, an Afrofuturist blueprint of what a united, self-sufficient, technologically advanced Africa could be. Beneath the superhero spectacle lies a cultural phenomenon. Wakanda speaks directly to centuries of Pan-African hopes and frustrations, a dream long deferred. Wakanda stands apart as a nation untouched by colonization, preserving its languages, traditions, and governance while advancing far beyond the technological capabilities of the rest of the world. This fusion, cultural preservation alongside cutting-edge innovation, represents a core principle of Pan-Africanism, that Africa's ancient wisdom and modern brilliance can coexist and even thrive side by side. At the heart of Wakanda's power is vibranium, a fictional metal that represents something very real: Africa's immense natural wealth, from gold to oil to rare earth minerals. In Wakanda, these resources are controlled by Africans for African development, a sharp contrast to the real world, where resource extraction too often benefits foreign powers at Africa's expense. But even within Wakanda, there's tension, the debate between isolationism and leadership. Should Wakanda hide its power to protect itself, or open its borders and lead the global Black struggle? That question echoes the debates Garvey, Nkrumah, and Pan-Africanists have wrestled with for over a century. Can Africa rise alone, or must its success be linked to the liberation of Black people across the globe? In many ways, Wakanda is both a fantasy and a mirror, reflecting the unfulfilled potential of Garvey's global vision and Nkrumah's continental dream. It's a symbol of what could be possible if Africa controlled its own destiny, stood united, and reclaimed its place as a leader in science, culture, and human progress. No conversation about African unity is complete without mentioning Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia, a living symbol of African independence and sovereignty at a time when nearly the entire continent was under colonial rule. As the leader of the only African nation to successfully resist European colonization, Selassie became a beacon of hope for Pan-Africanists and freedom fighters across the world. His speeches at the League of Nations and later the United Nations called for an end to colonial domination and the rise of a united, self-determined Africa. Selassie's leadership helped lay the groundwork for the formation of the Organization of African Unity, the predecessor to today's African Union, where African nations began to envision a continent free from external control, united by shared struggles and aspirations. His legacy didn't just echo in political chambers. It reverberated through culture, most famously inspiring Bob Marley's iconic anthem, Africa Unite. Marley, drawing directly from the ideals of Garvey, Nkrumah, and Selassie, transformed the call for continental unity into a global cultural movement, blending reggae's rebellious spirit with the prophetic hope of a reunited African family, standing strong on the world stage. Throughout history, from the early settlements of freed Africans in Liberia and Freetown to Kwame Nkrumah's call for continental unity, Marcus Garvey's global Back-to-Africa movement, and even the Afrofuturist vision of Wakanda, the dream of a united, self-sufficient Africa has inspired generations across the world. These stories, rooted in struggle, hope, and resistance, remind us that Pan-African unity is not just a vision of the past, but a blueprint for the future. Thank you for watching another Fresh K documentary. If you enjoyed this journey through African history and imagination, please like, share, and subscribe to help keep these conversations alive and growing. Until next time, stay connected to the vision of a united Africa.